Hello, everyone. This is Carol Scott with the National Ombudsman Resource Center, and I want to welcome you to the third webinar in our volunteer management series. This webinar is focused on retention, and what you will learn pretty quickly is that retention starts at the very beginning of volunteer recruitment. So we have a great group of people helping us with today's webinar. And so Katie, if you'll go to the next slide, please. Joining us today is Dana Gargas. Dana, oh well, you can pronounce your name correctly. That's probably step number one takeaway is be sure you know how to pronounce people's names. Our second speaker will be Aaron Riley. Both of these folks are local ombudsmen with the Washington State Ombudsman Program. Next slide, please. So what are we trying to do today? And when we talk about retention, and like I said, it really does begin from the beginning when you're onboarding a potential volunteer. Their length of stay with you really does depend on how they're welcomed, how they're trained, and we hope that today we can provide some real live good best practices for you to take away. There is time at the end of this webinar for conversation, Q&A. So down at the bottom of your screen is a toolbox, and you can type in questions in the Q&A box, or you can chat in the chat feature. You were sent the copy of the PowerPoints with the invitation that came today, but I will also, for the first 10 or 15 minutes, every few minutes, add it to the chat feature as new people come on. Next slide, please. So in terms of volunteers in the Ombudsman Program nationally, while this graph here actually looks kind of nice, if you look down at the bottom where the years are posted, you will see that in fact we have dropped about 2,000 volunteers in since 2013 to 2018. And this is, I mean, there's a lot of reasons people have left the program. Probably the number one reason is that people have just aged out. And so retaining the ones that we have is just so important. Next slide, please. And what you'll see here is the number of volunteers and the number of hours from in 2014, 2016, and 2018. And we have just gradually over time, we've lost volunteers. Sometimes that happens because new staff come in and volunteers see that as an opportunity to say, oh, I'm gonna step away also. And then their health, other activities, life kind of gets in the way. So our intent today is to try to focus on what can we do to keep people, to make sure that that they are getting the kudos that they deserve, and that they're also seeing the benefit to the work that they are doing. Next slide, please. So our mission is pretty simple. Our mission is to be the voice of residents, and we individually are not able to visit with every single resident in our areas. So having volunteers that can be our extension and be the ear and the voice of the resident is just so important. So next slide, please. And there's, on the other side, there are some people that maybe are in the program that it would be best not to have. We are not a program that says, oh, everybody should be an ombudsman. So there are consequences to not having the right person be a long-term care ombudsman. We spend so much time and energy and training and supervising We have a tenuous relationship with people. As long as we are truthful and as long as we stay committed to the task and role of the Ombudsman program, people will trust our program. But if we don't do those things, if we don't tell the truth, if we do things without the residents' permission, we're going to lose that trust. And then there's just, people say things. And so making sure that confidentiality and the other tenets of the Ombudsman program are constantly out there so that volunteers and staff can remember what those tenets are. Next slide, please. There's been a lot of talk about whether or not what a volunteer is. And I believe this very much what Linda Graff, who is a longtime volunteer manager, guru for all volunteer programs, she says volunteering increasingly refers to the pay scale, not the nature or the importance of the work. And that is so true. The job description doesn't change. It is how much money you get, whether you are paid or unpaid, that distinguishes what a volunteer is. Next slide, please. So I want to start off asking you to complete this poll. What percentage of your volunteers are retained each year? And I realize you probably don't have something just that you can turn to and find out the exact answer. But if you would just give an estimate of how many of your volunteers in your program stay from year to year. And we'll give just a few seconds for people to respond. Okay, it's kind of like watching a horse race. We'll give it just another 10 seconds or so. Okay, Katie, you can close the poll, please. So it looks like 51 to 80% seems to be where people are landing. 43% of you, 27% are saying 81 to 100%. That's wonderful. And some of you are struggling. The 0 to 25, 12%, and 26 to 50%. And again, it could, there are many reasons why that could be happening within your local program, but certainly something that needs to be looked at and see if there are things within your program that might need to be changed. Okay, next slide, please. One of the things I want to mention to you is that on the NORC website, we do have a volunteer intake toolkit, and I encourage you to just peruse that toolkit, see if there are any resources in there that might be helpful to you. That we have letters, we have volunteer requirements, we have an application form, we have acknowledgement forms that people can sign, sample interview questions, and additional resources. So you might take a look at that intake tool kit to see if there's maybe a piece that you'll want to include in your policies and procedures for your volunteers. Next slide. So the next poll, does your program perform evaluations of volunteers? And this could either be where the volunteer is asked, how are you doing? Or it could be where the supervisor looks and talks with a volunteer about how the program could be improved. So it could either be how can the volunteer improve, or how could the program improve? We'll give that just a few seconds for people to. I'll tell you, having a evaluation is very important. That way there's no surprises. And it also gives volunteers the opportunity to have input and to make sure that their voices are being heard. We'll give this another 10 seconds and close this poll. Okay, Katie, if you'll close this poll, please. So 63% of you at the local level say that you do have some sort of evaluation, and 22% have indicated that there's a evaluation at the state level. So this is very interesting information. Those of you that don't have a performance evaluation might want to consider that. And if you'll go to the next slide, Katie, here is an example of one program's self-evaluation. You know, I represent the resident's position in fulfilling my duties. I visit the assigned facility on a regular basis. I turn in reports to the coordinator in timely fashion, and then open-ended questions on what further training that that the person would like to have. This is just one example. If you go to the NORC website under volunteer management and go to the retention chapter, there are several examples of self-evaluations that you might consider. And if you can't find them, then email ombudscenter@theconsumervoice, and we'd be happy to send those to you. Next slide, please. And I just see that a question came in about how often should volunteers be evaluated. You know, probably once a year, and when they leave. And we'll talk a little bit more about exit conferences at the end. But, you know, if you're going to retain people, you need to know why people are leaving, and you need to know what people are thinking throughout their time as a volunteer. So probably an annual recommendation would be my recommendation. And Dana and Aaron, if you when you speak, if you want to mention that, that'd be great. Next slide, please. Zev Samuels with the Tennessee program. Next slide, please. Was going to be joining us and was not able to. Here's some things that he just, his thoughts that he wanted to share with you is that there are many whys to recruiting and training volunteer ombudsman representatives. And if your recruitment and training goes so well, a local ombudsman might find a whole room full of talented people. But that's just the beginning. You need to know who they are and what their talents are, where you want to take them with trainings and designating responsibilities, and then making sure that they are a part of the whole team, and they get the message of listening to residents and trying to help them help the resident have the best possible quality of life and care. Next slide, please. So Zev is mentioning that communication is two-way, that this is where making sure that volunteers have an opportunity to have input into your program, that they're not only at trainings being able to hear things, but they're able to ask questions, and that they get a response that they can take with them. Next slide, please. Regarding recognition and appreciation, Aaron has an annual recognition lunch and casual lunches and chats just for people to get together. You know, this is not the kind of job where people normally are working side by side. So having those opportunities for volunteers to see each other and to talk about their experiences, talk about their frustrations and their successes is just so very important to them, having this feeling of being a part of a team. Next slide, please. One of the things that when we first talked about doing this webinar, it was late last year and early January, and who knew that we were going to be at a time when volunteers and staff would not be visiting residents. So I asked the speakers to go ahead with their presentation under what they did under normal circumstances, but also in these unusual times when we're not able to have that luncheon. We're not able to sit down in a meeting room and talk. So one of the things that Zev is making sure is that his volunteers are watching the news and are keeping track of what's happening locally and sharing that information with their office. One of the things that they're doing in some of their programs in Tennessee is they are making PPE, the masks, to be able to give to families and to others so that they can be used. Next slide, please. So that's it for Zev. At this point, I'm going to turn the program over to Dana. So Dana, please unmute yourself and the floor is yours.
Oh, hi. There I
Hi.
am. Oh, okay. So hello all. I'm Dana Gargus, hard G, and it's lovely to be here. So the idea of retaining volunteers, I just got off of a Zoom call with a dozen of my volunteers just 20 minutes ago. And, you know, my parting words were, I love you guys. And I truly do love them and love being a part of this organization and working with these people. So I'll tell you a little bit about our group and how we all stay together. So next slide. So Kitsap County is a tiny little part of Washington State. We are pretty much across the water from Seattle. Give you an idea of where it is that I'm calling you from. Next slide. And a bit about Kitsap County, where we are small. So that is to our advantage that I can actually have physical access to my volunteers and my facilities. It's only 566 square miles, of which almost 400 square miles is land and 171 is water. There is over 250 miles of shoreline in Kitsap County. We have less than 300,000 people in our county, and our biggest employers are the Navy. So there is a transitory element of our population, and a lot of our residents in long-term care are military. Next slide. This is a really cool map that I use in training and when I'm conversations about our program anywhere. It's based on 2016 data, but it's a heat map that shows you where the concentrations are of the population over the age of 65. The red zones are the older population. And then interspersed on top of that are all these little green, brown, and purple houses, which are our long-term care facilities. And one of the big issues that we have is our northern part of our county is where the concentration of elders are, but our facilities are more in the southern part of our county. So it's very important that from a volunteer perspective, being able to understand that we don't have adequate representation across the whole county. Next. So here's some pictures of my volunteers. We average about 18 volunteers. We have approximately 2,700 long-term care beds in the county. The program has fluctuated between 15 to 20 volunteers at any one time. Next. So this is Valerie. She's been an ombudsman since 1994. Valerie was part of our very first ombudsman volunteer training program, and she's been with it in the same facility visiting on a regular basis since 1994. Next. So this is actually a picture of Gail Helseth Kennison, who was the regional ombudsman before I took over. So there's only been, there has been some stability in our region where there's only been 2 regional ombudsmen holding together this program since its inception in 1994. When I took over from Gail, there was already a process in place of volunteer recognition, which started with give everybody personalized business cards when they reach the 6-month level. And at the 1-year level, people get awarded these wooden plaques. This is not a 1-year plaque. This was another type of plaque that was given to Gail, but it gives you an image of what our plaques are. And then the other thing that was very important to these volunteers, next slide, is that every year we give them a little date stamp that they then can adhere around the perimeter of their wooden plaque, keeping track of their years of service. I have questioned the volunteers since I started in 2011, and this was very important to them. And so I have kept it up. I want to do whatever it takes to keep my volunteers happy because retention is the key. Next slide. So in addition to plaques and business cards, our volunteers have a recognition luncheon once a year. Next slide. So there's always lots of food. There's always flowers given. There's acknowledgments at these, at our recognition. Generally, if the funding is available for us to have the recognition catered, we do that. If the funding isn't available, my advisory council steps up and usually will cater the event and do a potluck so that my volunteers are treated to a lunch and they're not having to do any of the work. Next. We also do a Christmas party every year, and there's usually a white elephant gift exchange as a part of that. We also take time to remember those volunteers that we have lost. This is an example. We had a volunteer who passed away quite suddenly a couple of years ago, and our group felt at an absolute loss on how to acknowledge her. We put our brains together, we started doing some fundraising, and we were able to put together this outdoor furniture in her honor that sits in the courtyard of the nursing home where she was the ombudsman for 16 years. Next. So working with the volunteers, as everybody knows, changed drastically. And this is a copy of our governor's proclamation that came out on the 10th of March, which suspended and waived our residents' rights with visitation, access to representatives, community interaction, the resident family councils, refusal to perform services for the facility, and reasonable accommodation. All of these rights are in flux right now, and it's been difficult to manage enthusiasm. I'm seeing a question popping up. Do I have staff ombudsman as well as volunteers? Everybody in my program is a volunteer. I'm not quite full-time and I'm the only paid staff. Thanks for that question. So these are all volunteers. I've heard some of the volunteers said that they started when they first retired as a way to pay it forward. And then as they started getting closer to the age of 80, realizing they were thrilled with the inside tract of information. So now they know where they would and wouldn't want to go. And that kind of inside information, next slide, is a great way of looking at one way of retention. My volunteers, the amount of energy we all put into the relationship and the work is just an asset worth keeping. You know, a new trained volunteer is absolutely an asset because I've spent a lot of time and effort in getting them trained. But the longer they're doing the job, the more valuable they are. We all know that this is a job that you learn by doing. And the longer they're doing, the more skills they have achieved. And I want to keep them engaged. So I don't let people leave my program readily. I try to keep them around. And sometimes it takes evaluating what they're doing and how can we reinvent what it is that they're doing and how can they look at their contribution to the program in a different way. I've had some volunteers where the physical work of visiting a nursing home became too much for them, but stopping by at a local adult family home was much easier. So being able to accommodate their needs as they age is also a very important part of this. Next slide. Staying connected in this time with the COVID-19, as well as before the COVID-19, my volunteers have my cell phone. We are always available to each other. I make myself available to them pretty much 24/7. I want to, because my volunteers are not paid, they are not, in a lot of respects, they're not even from professional long-term care histories. I feel like it's my job to support them, that when they run into questions, when they have concerns, I'm there with answers. I'm there with copies of local laws and regulations to support them in the work that they're doing. And in these times with COVID, we used to have meetings once a month in person. We started having phone meetings and quickly moved to the Zoom meetings, and my volunteers wanted to meet once a week to keep that connection going, and that's where we are. Next slide. Another thing that's an advantage for them and them wanting to stay connected is that I am the connection to keep them in the loop of all of the other county information that's coming down. My office is a part of our Area Agency on Aging. I sit on a task force of healthcare readiness. I'm also part of our Northwest Healthcare Response Network. I'm also involved with our Complete Count Census Committee and other county community resources. And I feed to my volunteers at all of these weekly Zoom meetings as much information as I can to help them feel a part. And that is incredibly valuable. They want to stay connected. They're concerned about their residents who are now isolated and cut off from the community, but they themselves are isolated and cut off from the community. And they want as much information as I can feed them. And that's an important tool in helping to keep them connected. I think I'm sort of at the end of my presentation here. And any questions I will be happy to answer.
Great, thank you, Dana. There's one question, but I think we're gonna, so far, but I think we're gonna hold it until after Aaron speaks. One of the comments that you made, though, reminded me that I did not put a slide in, but I'm going to send out in the chat feature, and we will make sure that that everybody has this. The latest reauthorization of the Older Americans Act included wording in there that now makes it clear that spending money on volunteer retention is allowable. And so all those of you that have been struggling to have a lunch, to buy, business cards or notebooks, and have been raising money or can now use federal funding for that. You might want to talk with your state ombudsman before you buy everybody a vehicle or a scooter or whatever. But so I've included that in the chat, and we will also include it in the information that's posted on the website. So this is great and news that state ombudsman and local ombudsman have been asking for this for many years. So, so Aaron, it is now your turn to wow us.
Hi, I'm going to leave my camera on because I like making visual contact with people. Hi, I'm Aaron Riley. I'm the Regional Long-Term Care Ombudsman for the Eastern Washington region. And my region is about 5 counties, whereas Dana's region is 1 county. And that gives me a lot of territory. So part of my region is also very rural, and Spokane County and Whitman County may be my 2 counties that are more urban. So we can go to the next slide, please. That'd be great. So here's just a quick organizational chart that I wanted to share with people. So since you got a little bit of information about the program in the state from Dana, we get money from the federal government just like every other state. It comes to the Washington state government. You can see how it then moves through state government down to the Department of Commerce, and then part of it goes to the Department of Social and Health Services. The Department of Commerce then contracts with the Multi-Service Center out of King County, and that is where the state ombudsman office is housed. So Patricia Hunter and Vicki Elting are our state ombudsman and our assistant state ombudsman. They then contract with community action agencies and area agencies on aging to run what we call regional offices, and they're all housed in nonprofit agencies that are subcontractors of the Multi-Service Center, the State Ombuds Office. So at the bottom, you can see there's me, Aaron Riley, Regional Ombudsman. I have 2.5 staff in my office. So I have 1 other full-time person, I'm full-time, and I have a part-time administrative assistant that kind of, how should I say, rounds out the staff. We have currently 35 volunteers that are active in our 5-county area. So I'm pleased with that. We try to have between 35 and 40. I've had as many as 50 volunteers. Typically 50 volunteers tend to stretch me and the staff quite a bit. We oftentimes think about, could we do more? Probably if I were to grow the staff, maybe. That would depend on funding. But right now, with 2.5 staff, 40 to 50 volunteers is a pretty good load for me to, or for us to handle. Next slide, please. So you can see here's how the state is divided up. This map is a little dated for those of us who live here in the state, but those who don't, it's pretty relevant. But if you look at the far right-hand side, there is Ferry County at the top. You see Stevens County, Pend Oreille County, and Pend Oreille is a Native American word. So when you look at it, it doesn't pronounce the way it reads. And then you have Spokane County beneath Pend Oreille County, and Whitman County. So those 5 counties that are in different shades of blue is my region. That's the 5 counties that I'm responsible for. So next slide. So to give you an idea of what that region looks like, we currently have, like I said, 35 active volunteers. and that is serving in 4 of the 5 counties. Currently, there is no volunteer in Pend Oreille County at this time. It is probably the most sparsely populated of the 5 counties. It is probably the most rural and probably maybe also the most economically disadvantaged of the 5 counties. So I've really been working very, very hard trying to build a network in Pend Oreille County to recruit. I have a volunteer from Pend Oreille County that sits on my regional advisory council. She has been a great help to try to shake loose volunteers. We are shaking bushes everywhere we can to kind of shake out a volunteer, but we've not been successful yet. It's been about 2, maybe 3 years since I've had a volunteer in Pend Oreille County. Like I said earlier, 4 of the 5 counties are primarily rural. So there's small towns scattered throughout the county. So you have to kind of find out where those counties are and what those county or local papers are. I've gotten very good friends with the local papers in different counties in terms of running public service announcements and ads to recruit volunteers. Our region has 292 long-term care facilities and the capacity to serve over 7,000 residents in terms of 7,000 beds in those 292 facilities. Next slide. So to give you an idea of how well we're covering all those facilities in terms of our volunteer coverage, we have 24 nursing homes, which represent about 2,353 beds. And right now we're at 83% are covered by a regularly visiting ombudsman. We have 63 assisted living facilities. They constitute about 3,739 beds, and we're at about 55% coverage of a regularly visiting ombudsman. We have 207 adult family homes, and that represents about 1,159 beds, and we're about 21% coverage of a regularly visiting ombudsman. Our newest type of facility in the state is called an enhanced services facility. And these facilities are primarily targeted towards serving people with mental illness that tend to be frequent flyers in the criminal justice system or frequent flyers in terms of being hospitalized at the state hospitals. And so this is trying to create a safety net in the community, whereas they can be successful with community placement. We have 2 of those facilities in our region, and that represents about 24 beds. And right now we're at 50% coverage in terms of a regularly visiting ombudsman. And as you can see at the bottom, 296 facilities, 7,205 beds. Like I said, it's a pretty significant service area. Next slide.
Aaron, could you define what an adult family home is?
Sure, sure. An adult family home in the state of Washington is a residential placement. Typically, they are private owners. They typically serve between 4 to 6 residents. And they are very, very home-like. Most of the adult family homes I've visited, I'm really impressed with how well the homes are maintained, as well as some homes are bigger where everyone has their own bedroom. Some homes they share a bedroom, and typically meals are done on a family style. And we have some that are owned by registered nurses or nurse practitioners. So sometimes they provide a very high level of skilled care in terms of the acuity of the residents. So that's been really pleasing to see some people who you would think would be in a skilled nursing facility that actually are residing in the community and getting the care they need. Yeah, so that's an adult family home. So retaining volunteers, our program's retention mantra is retention starts with recruitment. And my team, when we start that discussion, start that engagement process, we typically do 2 volunteer certification trainings a year. And we feel like between that time, we need to keep people excited, keep them on the hook. So we do a lot of communication with people prior to interviewing them, prior to the screening, and then prior to the actual training class, because we're hoping that that's our getting to know you and getting to know us phase. And hopefully at the conclusion of that getting to know each other phase, we would feel it's going to be a good fit. At any time in that process, we feel like it's not working, or this person may have an axe to grind with a particular facility, then we feel like it's not a good match. And we have several times had to say, no, we don't think this is going to work. Volunteers stay where they are appreciated. So here too, we from day one begin thanking people for what they're about to do. Once they're trained, we start thanking them for what they will be doing soon, what they are doing after they're trained and certified. And it's just one of those things that we do because they're the lifeblood of the program. I cannot be in those 275 facilities. I would love to think I could be in all 275 facilities, but I'm only one person. So volunteer appreciation is volunteer retention. We believe that we have to appreciate them in significant ways. So while we do the daily thank you or, phone thank yous and please and all that other kind of kindness, we feel like we need to stop once a year or twice a year and do something special and unique to really say that we appreciate you, we appreciate what you do for the residents at the facilities that you're assigned. And a lot of volunteers really get to know their residents. And as a result, those close bonds form. So we really, really try to make sure that they understand that we really appreciate the gift that they're giving of themselves to the residents. Volunteers' contributions must be meaningful. I don't like giving volunteers what I consider busy work. I can do filing. We have had volunteers to come in and do filing, but I like for volunteers to feel like that the contributions that they're making to this program are contributions that are significant, they're meaningful, they impact people. So when they're out in the facility and they're talking with residents, they're talking with administrators, they're talking with CNAs, and explaining the program to people, providing information and assistance to people, those are the meaningful activities that I want to make sure that they really understand and that they see the value added that we bring to residents and to the staff in those facilities. Next slide, please. So I know this is a little bit difficult to see, but hopefully I just wanted to kind of give you an example of, this is our long-term care ombudsman program volunteer commitment form. And when I first became the regional ombudsman, like Dana, I inherited my program from my predecessor. She had been the regional ombudsman for 26 years in this region. She started the program. So like Dana's program, I was very fortunate that there had not been a lot of turnover in the position. I've been with the program for about 5 years, and hopefully I will continue to be with the program for another 5 years or more or longer. So when I first became the regional, and we would interview volunteers, and once we would complete the interview, this was one of several forms we would give them as part of a packet. And we would sit them at a desk and say, hey, please fill these out and then return them to me. So then I would sit down in a vacuum and review the forms, and then I would then sign off at the bottom. And what we found was that people were filling out the form, not really thinking about the commitment they were making. And as such, we would then put in to a person 32 hours of training or more, and then come to realize that a month or two later that some people would resign. And we were like, whoa, wait a minute, you made a commitment and we asked you to make at least a 1-year commitment, and now you're resigning. So what we found is that people were signing this form but weren't really paying attention to what they were signing. So now after each interview, I sit down with a volunteer and we complete this form together where it says their name, I'm willing to commit at least 4 hours per week to long-term care ombudsman program for 1 year. And I make sure that, are you be able to do that? I think just having that conversation and saying it to me personally, not just on paper, but yes, Aaron, I can do that. So then we go down to the next bullet or the next paragraph. I'm willing to work with the regional ombudsman or ombudsman staff and ask them that question and say, if you can do this, you can commit to this, then please initial, the initial. And so we do this each one step by step. And then at the conclusion, before they sign, I'm going like, so just to make sure, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 commitments here that I'm asking you to make. And you've initiated those commitments. So I just want to make sure that going forward, you feel you can fulfill these commitments. And so I think that raised the form, the level of the form and the importance of making this commitment. And so far, I would say that we've seen retention slightly nudge up. I don't have a lot of data to support that, but I can tell you that we did see a reduction in people resigning right after we would do training. I mean, within 2 or 3 months of training, it'd be like, wait a minute, what are we doing wrong? So next slide, please. So benefits of being a long-term care ombudsman. I feel that being able to articulate the benefits of being an ombudsman is really, really a strong part of retaining volunteers. And I think so not only just the fact that they make a contribution that's meaningful, but being able to say, here's the value added to you as an individual or as a professional or as an ombudsman. You get free certification training. We put 32 hours into each training. That's me, my staff's time. We have 4 to 5 speakers that come in from outside of the program and do 1 to 2 hour workshops during the training. We also talk about prevention in terms of abuse, neglect, and exploitation, helping people to understand how what we do prevents that. We do mileage reimbursement. So mileage from their home to their facility and back, we reimburse them for that. We offer continuing education. We do anywhere from probably 8 to 20 hours of continuing education a year. That usually takes the form of a monthly volunteer in-service that we do for 2 hours, and it's usually the last Thursday of the month. And we have a pretty good number of volunteers that attend that. And they know that they have to attend at least 6 ongoing continuing education opportunities in a year to maintain their certification by the state Ombuds Office guidelines. We tell them that you get to meet new and interesting people, and our residents absolutely love to tell their stories. So we tell them that if you like people, if you can engage and are easy to talk to, you won't have any problem with talking with our residents. Helping our most vulnerable neighbors, a lot of very ill people, a lot of disabled people, people with cognitive decline, dementia are in long-term care facilities. And so you will be working with some of our most vulnerable neighbors. And so being able to be of help to those vulnerable people, I think is a great resource, a great way to give back. And I think our ombuds really do get that. Increased knowledge of community resources. A lot of what we do is information and assistance. It's amazing how many families have relatives in long-term care and they really, really don't understand the system. They don't understand insurance. They don't understand healthcare. So we provide a lot of information and assistance, as well as they struggle with sometimes the legal aspects of various parts of the system. Annual volunteer appreciation and recognition. I mentioned that earlier. We feel like that is a benefit. We're hoping that at those appreciations, you walk away with something of value. We always make sure that we feed people well and we pat them on the back. And we also want to make sure that they leave with a token of appreciation. So there's always an appreciation gift at all of our appreciation functions. Next slide, please. So this is just a little information about the program in terms of showing you that when we do our appreciation once a year, we look at total hours and total visits, and we give an award, first, second, and third for the person at the most hours and the most visits. We look at years of service. We had a volunteer that had been with the program for over 20 years. He's been away from the program on sabbatical. We've got a couple of volunteers that are over 15 years. We've got some approaching 15 years. Then we have a 10-year plaque that we give. We have an 8-year pin. We have a 5-year, 3-year, and a 1-year pin that we give out at our appreciation. And each of those pins are different. And you can see that we have a Hearts and Hands pin, a Spirit of Excellence pin. And at the bottom down there, you can see there's a box that says 15 years long-term ombudsman. That's the top of the box. Inside the box is an ink pen that we have engraved with the volunteer's name and 15 years of service. And there's a little chart on the right here with volunteer names and certification date and service year. So we track all that. And if you look at the very bottom, it's kind of small to see, but total experience of our volunteers right now, at the time we did this report, was 117 years and 10 months of experience. So when you look at the collective impact of your volunteers, you have a lot of experience in the room with you. And we look at it as a collective sharing and collective learning process. Next slide. So here's an idea of what some of our volunteer appreciation gifts look like. We host an annual holiday party and potluck, and the picture on the right is the White Elephant Gift Exchange table. You can see the gifts are there, and we have a small Christmas tree. The White Elephant Gift Exchange is hugely popular with our volunteers. So we know that every year when we do our holiday party, that has to be part of the agenda. We cannot get away with not doing that. The picture on the left is our annual volunteer appreciation, where we had gifts that had purchased and put together. Those are thermal lunch boxes for our volunteers, and we've got little gingerbread men and candy canes and candy plates and things that we put together. We have volunteer ombuds hats and toboggans to the left of that, and so those were provided by the state ombudsman office. So volunteers can be identified with a cap when they go into the facility or their toboggan. So again, we're just trying to give people something practical, and I don't like giving what I consider paperweights. People have enough paperweights on their desk. I want to give them something they can use. Next slide, please. So, volunteer appreciation. We acknowledge volunteers' birthdays at our monthly in-service meetings. Sick volunteers are mailed a get well card. Oftentimes we will call them and talk to them on the phone to see how they're doing when they're ill. We make it a practice to say good job. I think sometimes the cases that we work on are very emotional. They're very convoluted. They're very complex. And we want to make sure that we say good job, because sometimes there's a lot of work to peel back the layers and understand what's happening, what's going on with a case. So we say thank you, we say please, and we say good idea. And we try to say all those things often. Next slide, please. So some COVID-19 considerations. Communicate to keep volunteers engaged. I think that Dana mentioned this, and so we're doing the same thing. My volunteers are not as tech savvy. Some love technology and some struggle with technology. So we're not there yet on doing Zoom meetings, but I've polled my volunteers, and it looks like quite a few of them have the capacity to do Zoom meetings. So we may be looking at that if we're not back to visiting and back to being able to have meetings in person soon. Share success stories and feel-good stories in terms of the ombudsman stories. They need to hear that the work they do is successful. So everything that we do, we can't always solve every problem, but when we can, I think it's nice to share those success stories with one another. Encourage creativity in communicating with residents. Some people don't like to talk on the phone. Some people are uncomfortable with technology. So what are some other ways in which we can communicate with people and stay connected? Promote use of webinars and other online learning opportunities. So while we're not able to get together now face-to-face, there are other opportunities to continue learning, and so we try to encourage that. There's a link here at the bottom of this slide. If you can click that, that's going to take us to a quick video.
Hey, what's up, everyone? I'm Louis Bonzo.
Back in McConaughey crashed the seniors virtual bingo game.
The True Detective star joined a Zoom call to play bingo with the residents of the Enclave at Round Rock Senior Living in his home state of Texas. Matthew was with his wife Camilla, their 2 kids, and his mom Kay as they called into the senior meetup. The Enclave posted a video on their Facebook page showing McConaughey calling out the chip that led to 2 big winners. For I-24. Oh! Richard Lex is waving a hammer up high. Well, we got Charles King to the iPad up high. We got 2 winners. Look at this clipboard. 4th column straight down. Winner. Let's see your Charles King's iPad. The senior living facility captioned this video. Ever play virtual bingo with Matthew McConaughey?
So I just wanted people to see that that's one example of a creative way in which we can communicate and do things. You know, I think playing bingo with residents, virtually Matthew McConaughey being a celebrity calling in was a great way to get the seniors involved, to get them doing something, having fun in their rooms. So yeah, just think out of the box. So next slide. So this is an example of one of my communication emails. It's one of my longer emails to volunteers, but it's just to give them some ideas of virtual tools that can be suggested to facilities or share with residents. They can do online board games. They can have presentations, performances, demonstrations, yoga lessons, cooking lessons, online art clubs. They can create a collaborative story. They can take free online courses together. So there's lots of things that people can do. We've had a volunteer to call in and talk to me about what should I do? Could I ask about what are they doing to do activities differently to combat isolation and loneliness and depression? I said, absolutely, you can ask about that, because again, we want residents to have the highest quality of life possible. And one way to do that is that think creatively about doing activities during COVID-19. So next slide, please. So here's another example in a skilled nursing facility. This was on Facebook. The residents are at their door, they're using their tables, and they're playing bingo. So again, how can we be creative, still keeping everyone active, and not just have them isolating in their room where they get depressed and feel like, you know, wow, gee, I'm just kind of locked away here. We want people to thrive, and I think this is a way to get people active and involved, yet, you know, you observe social distancing and not put anybody at risk for, you know, contracting COVID-19. Everybody's more than 6 feet apart. Okay, next slide. So that's the end of my presentation. Here's my contact information and emails, addresses, and website. So thank you guys. I appreciate the opportunity to present.
Great, thank you, Aaron. Next slide, please. So these are just a few of the reasons why Tom McKee has said that people quit, and the #1 reason is the volunteer leader who doesn't know how to lead. So I think these are all things I think that we actually do a pretty good job of, and I don't know that that we've ever seen complaints from volunteers on these particular things, but it's important to be thinking about what is it that causes people to leave. Next slide, please. And again, people tend to leave a volunteer program because things are not clear to them, or they feel alone or isolated, or they didn't receive the ongoing training. You know, right now is a great time to be getting feedback from your volunteers, to ask them, you know, whether you do it as a survey monkey or whether you do it as a letter to them and have them write in the answers and send it back in a self-addressed stamped envelope. Now is the time to be getting input from your volunteers on your training, on their understanding of what your expectation is of their role and other aspects of your program. Next slide, please. And we can learn a lot from people who quit. As I've mentioned earlier, there are examples on the NORC website of surveys that you can take to find out, to get information about why someone has left the program. Next, please. And these are some of the questions that you might consider asking. So you can take a look at these at your leisure. Next, please. And obviously, one of the big things, if you are having your volunteers send in information on casework, it is very important. And whether or not they do the casework and send those reports in, they need to be hearing what you as a local program and the state are doing. They need to hear they need to see that big picture. They need to understand what their impact is on the work that is being done. And they need to be encouraged to share what they are hearing and the work that they are doing. Next slide, please. So retention really is not something that's done. It is the outcome. It's not a task that is done. So as we've all three kind of said today, it is part of the whole volunteer management from the very moment that you ask someone to consider being a volunteer. Retention is built into each step of the volunteer process. Next slide, please. And these are some things that volunteers say that makes them happy, that you're prepared for them, that you make them feel welcomed, that the training is good, that the work they do is interesting, and they do want to know how much time it's going to take. And I know from state to state that varies, but I would say normally we're looking at 3 to 4 to 5 hours a week is what a volunteer ombudsman representative would be asked of. Next, please. And these are some more things that make people happy. And I apologize for my phone. Hang on. Yeah, I really wanted that landline, but it's driving me nuts. Next slide, please. So I think one of the big messages you've heard today is that communication is key. Next slide, please. That whether or not it is face-to-face or 6 feet apart or through technology, it is important that you are communicating and talking or sending information out. So our third and last poll, Katie, please open it up, asks if your program uses some kind of technology or has technology available for your program to use, whether at the state level that you can use or whether at the local level. So we will do this real quick. We did mention that this was going to be a 75-minute webinar. So for those of you that are panicking that I've gone over, I actually still have 10 minutes. So, but I am wanting to leave time for some of the questions that came up. So we'll give this another 5 seconds. Okay, Katie, close her up. So 38% say that they've got technology at the state level, and 55%. I'm glad. I didn't know how high it would be at the local level, but I am glad that you've got that. For those of you that maybe haven't looked into Zoom, there is a free version that you can get. The downside is that you can only be on the call for 45 minutes and you're limited to 20 people. But if you've got a small volunteer program, that might suffice. Or you offer it twice and let people choose which time they want to be on. Next slide, please. So next slide, please. So I'm not gonna, just let you know that when you look at the slides, there are a ton of resources regarding retention. There's the exit interview questions, polling again. And if any of you are not part of the volunteer management listserv, please feel free to email me, cScott@theconsumervoice.org, and you can join the over 140 volunteer ombudsman managers across the country. People ask questions, people share resources. It's a nice way to be a part of the group that that is really doing the work of working with volunteers. Next slide, please. And these are just some more communication tips. There are several webinars and calls that are on the NORC website. These are just the titles of some of them. If you haven't had a chance to listen to them, again, this might be a good time to either watch these or send them to your volunteers to have them watch them. Next slide, please. And this is the volunteer management page on the NORC website. You can see that the volunteer recognition and retention is the fourth blue line on this page. And then the volunteer management conference calls and webinars is the fifth one. Next slide. I'm hoping that each of you received the NORC notes and the Ombudsman Outlook. The Outlook comes out quarterly. The NORC notes is sent out the first day of each month and contains information on a different topic each month. And you can look back through the previous months by going to our website and seeing different resources. The April notes this month has been about retention, so and recognition. So please please look for that. If you are not getting these, feel free to email me or email ombudscenter@theconsumervoice.org. Next slide. And of course, if you have developed something that is successful in retaining, recruiting, training of volunteers, I hope that you will share that with us. There's no reason for people to be reinventing anything. I think all of us are happy to have things that all they need to do is maybe make it state specific or regional specific. So please continue to share your good work. Next slide. Next slide. I will mention, and we'll get to about 6 minutes of questions. So Dana and Aaron, be ready and as short an answer as you possibly can. I just want to mention that we do have an app that's called the Long-Term Care Ombudsman Resource Center app. You can go to the Google or Apple store and download it, and it has the Older Americans Act language. It has the Ombudsman rule. It has resident rights information. I mean, if you are out in the field and somebody asks you a question, you can use this app to find a ton of resources rather than having to go back to your office, get your computer, or even to schlep around with your laptop. So I'm going to start off, Aaron and Dana, open up your mics, open up your pictures, and we will jump right in here. So, well, several people have said that they have difficulty with their volunteers not being tech savvy. Does anybody want to give a 30-second?
Well, I would jump in and say that I told you that I was on a call with a dozen of my volunteers on. I are able to call a phone number and connect to Zoom by telephone. It doesn't have to be using a computer. It doesn't have to be that complicated. We did find that the free conference call was a little cumbersome, that it was difficult for them to be signing on, and having the Zoom account and just setting up the Zoom meeting made it easier by phone.
Interesting. Okay. Do your volunteers shadow an experienced ombudsman before going out?
We offer a mentor to our volunteers, so it's really based on what the new trainee wants. We have some people who are just ready to go, and then we have some volunteers that go, I really would like to have a mentor. And so what we ask is that the mentor go with them to their facility and observe them and assist with just kind of walking through the facility, meeting residents, talking to residents. I or my staff do the initial introduction meeting. So they don't just show up at the facility cold. I take them out, or either my staff, Pauline, takes them out and introduce them to the facility. And then they go to the experienced volunteers facility and observe them in their facility. And we ask that they do this 2 to 3 times, whatever that feels comfortable for them. And that when they feel ready to be let go, then the mentor can let them go out on their own.
Yeah, I tell my volunteers when they're new trainees that I'm not going to let them out on their own if they don't feel comfortable. And it's all about their level of comfort, because as a new trainee, they're a valuable asset to me, and I don't want to burn them out. I don't want to put them in a situation where they don't feel comfortable or competent, and I will offer them shadowing experiences until they feel comfortable.
Okay. And Elaine has just reminded us that shadow might not be the right word to say, that we're doing joint visits. Language matters. Okay. So, Erin and Dana, what's your annual budget? Just
They're going to be very different because we're very different sized programs. I'm thinking off the top of my head, mine is somewhere in the $90,000 range. And I can tell you that only about half of my annual budget is supplied by the state ombudsman program. I'm one of the I think I'm one of the only programs in our state that is actually getting the majority of its budget locally, because I'm housed in a AAA, and I actually did work in the AAA before I became the ombudsman. And the AAA uses me and understands the value of the community resource, the community education that the ombudsman program offers. So I actually get about half of my budget from our local county resources, the general fund coming into our local county. The county commissioners put in money towards boosting the budget of the ombudsman program because they understand it's a local asset, which I'm thrilled with.
That's super. Erin.
Great. My budget's about $200,000, and I get money from being a community action agency. We get community services block grant funding. So I get about a fourth, a third of my funding comes there. I also get money from our area agency on aging, which is Aging and Long-Term Care Eastern Washington. And but the bulk of my funding does come from the state ombuds office. So again, I've got 2.5 staff people, so my budget's a little bit larger than Dana. So I'm right at 200,000.
Okay, thank you. So this question is, to what extent is the long-term care ombudsman resisted by facilities? I'm kind of assuming that they're talking about the volunteer. What are the most difficult aspects of the position? So to what extent are ombudsmen resisted by the facilities? What is your all's experience?
I can say that, because we are a small region, we really operate like a small town, and everybody knows everybody's business. And the ombudsman, I've always had the attitude, we aren't here to police. We're here to make every facility the best it can be. And the facilities receive us in that way. If they're having issues dealing with a family, or if they're having issues and thinking that there might be an involuntary discharge coming, they reach out and ask for help before things get out of hand. And I so appreciate that. So I would say 95% of the time, we are a respected part of the long-term care community.
Okay. Aaron?
Oh, great. I don't know if we have enough time, but yeah, we, for the most part, most of our facilities are well received. I always try to train the volunteer and have a discussion with the administrator to see us as an extension of their continuous quality improvement. So they have to do continuous quality improvement. So if we can be seen as a part of that, then this becomes a value added proposition. We're here to help you get the best quality of care and the best quality of life for your residents. And you know, I always, when we're training the volunteers, you can get more, what's the Southern expression, you can kill more flies with
honey than with vinegar.
With honey than vinegar. So think about your approach when you go into the facility. If you go in with a vinegar approach, you're not gonna be warm and welcoming to the staff, because you know, you got to work with the residents and the staff in the facility.
Absolutely. I think we could go on, and there are more questions. After COVID is over, how will you combat the fears of your volunteers or recruit new volunteers? And let me just mention, that for those of you who may not have seen it, the National Ombudsman Resource Center will be hosting a 4-month series on self-care that is open not only for paid ombudsman, but volunteer ombudsman. And I would highly encourage you to make sure when you see the information on registration that you send it out to those volunteers that that are connected. We do all our meetings on Zoom, but like Aaron mentioned, you can, or Dana, whichever one of you, you can use a phone to be a part of that. But we're working with this ombudsman program in the state of Colorado to bring this 4-part series on self-care. We'll be talking about, well, just every aspect, and it is designed for ombudsmen. So it would be very applicable and appropriate to have your volunteers on there. So guys, 30 seconds on how you're gonna get over help your volunteers get over the fears and how you're gonna recruit new people.
You know, I find that I'm constantly reminding my volunteers they can't go in. They are so anxious about their residents. They want to be there. They want to be a part of it. And I think we're all learning about technology, and I think we're going to have to look at retraining our new volunteers and recruitment about using these new technologies to do our job.
Yeah. Thank you. Aaron?
Exactly. I would say be honest about the risk, talk about how to protect yourself. This is a iterative process. We're all learning, and COVID-19, 2 years, a year ago, no one knew of it. Now we know of it. We're learning more about it every day. So what we get from science, we'll pass along. And I think that we responded rapidly. Our state ombudsman pulled us out of the facilities because the risk was too great. So we've not lost any ombudsman to COVID-19, thank goodness. So I think that being realistic about the risk of, there's flu in the facilities, there's other diseases in the facility. I've gone in a facility where I've had to gown up and mask up and to protect myself, met with the resident afterwards, did all the washing afterwards. I think it was a MRSA case. So you just do what you have to do and protect yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you. There was one question that came in, and I'm sorry to keep you guys so long, but so it sounds like both of you do ombudsman casework. And Aaron, you are not only maybe doing that, but you are supervising other staff. And now you have this volunteer program. How do you prioritize, or not prioritize, how do you make time for both of those jobs? Because I will tell you, and I will give you my opinion, not about necessarily you two, but I think this is one of the reasons why we have seen a decrease in the number of volunteers, is that over the past 5 years, we've actually seen an increase in paid staff in the Ombudsman program. And I believe that the reason that we're losing volunteers is that everybody's so excited about doing the work that they've it's kind of an afterthought. And so I think hopefully one of the messages that will come out of this webinar is that your volunteer program cannot be an afterthought. If you're going to have them out there representing the program, talking with residents and families and staff and resolving issues, they have got to be treated just like they're a staff person and be given the love and care and feeding and kicking the shins whenever necessary.
First line in the casework.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I do casework. I have to do staff performance reviews, disciplinary action. I have to deal with volunteers as well. So it is a juggling act, and budget times, scheduling time to do the budget. I got different funders and different contracts, reviewing those contracts. So for me, the priority is the volunteers. Like I said, they're the lifeblood. So the administrative stuff, I try to say volunteers first, administrative stuff second. Sometimes they switch it, there are times that my staff know that, okay, I'm working on a grant or I'm working on the budget. So I need you guys to take the calls. I need you guys to provide the TA to the volunteers. So it's a team. We work together, and they can tell you that if I'm working on something that I need to have undivided attention, they really step up and try to support me in that way. But they know I have an open door policy. At any time, a volunteer can come in. They can come in at any time. And because of self-care, if a case or a phone call is disturbing to them, they come in and they debrief that with me, because I don't want them hanging on to that stuff and making themselves sick.
Excellent. Aaron, Dana, Katie in the background. I can't thank you guys enough. This has been I think a webinar that's given people things to think about, some real life situations that they can relate to, and also some ideas for future work in this area. Again, thank you so much, and thank you all on this call. You will all be receiving a copy of this recording along with handouts, the PowerPoint, and we'll make sure that commitment document is included in there. And again, I'm in awe of the work that you all do, and I just ask that you all be safe, and we will rejoice the day that we go back into nursing homes and can actually give a resident a hug. So everybody take care, stay safe, and until next time, we're out of here. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.